Hello and welcome back to the channel, sleepy listeners. Tonight, we are settling in deep. We are finally taking the plunge into the deepest pools of the original narrative, the winding, tragic story of the missing children and the shadowy family at the heart of it all. This is our complete, uninterrupted overview and analysis of the classic Five Nights at Freddy's lore, designed to guide you from the very beginning, through the darkest reveals, and right up to the end of the original saga. Before we begin this long journey, please do hit that like button to help this video reach more listeners. Subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what time it is for you right now, and where in the world you are settling down to listen. Now let us begin at the genesis of the tragedy, the moment the music stopped playing and the haunting started. The origin point of the horror was not a mechanical failure or a market miscalculation, but a failure of human connection, born from the initial, ill-fated partnership between two men whose visions were fundamentally and dangerously opposed. Henry Emily, the pure creative visionary who sought to capture and perfect the experience of childhood joy through warm, welcoming characters, and William Afton, the engineering prodigy whose focus was entirely upon the proprietary mechanisms hidden beneath the bright metallic skin, dedicating himself not to entertainment, but to the mastery of complex, dangerous mechanical secrets. Henry saw the characters, the stages, and the dining rooms bathed in the inviting glow of a perfect Saturday afternoon, conceptualizing the animatronics as extensions of a benevolent, protective family unit designed solely to elicit laughter and wonder. His blueprints were sketches of movement, expression, and comforting familiarity, prioritizing the emotional connection above all else. William, conversely, saw only potential systems, interlocking safety features that were fundamentally flawed, specialized hydraulic pressures, and internal pathways that could serve purposes far removed from commercial hospitality, treating the colorful exterior as a mere disguise for advanced, often morally ambiguous, robotics. He worked in the quiet periphery of the workshop, obsessively developing the sophisticated internal architectures that Henry either overlooked or naively trusted, concentrating on efficiency and secrecy, always ensuring that the most complex and compromising aspects of the robot's dual functionality remained solely within his domain of expertise, a secretive knowledge that fueled a growing arrogance and detachment from Henry's naive, sentimental dreams. This division was not simply a business separation of roles. It was an ideological fault line running directly beneath the foundation of their first establishment, wherein Henry built the heart, while William installed the complex, unstable hardware designed with dark, hidden utility, a proprietary system of mechanics intended to serve William's research interests, which were already straying into areas of non-commercial, specialized containment and concealment, setting the stage for a conflict that was inevitable the moment their differing priorities were encased in the shared metal shell of their inaugural creations. The earliest establishment, Fazbear's Family Diner, was the physical realization of this unstable compromise, featuring the golden, iconic Springlock animatronics, Fazbear and Spring Bonnie, which stood as monuments to William's technical genius and his profound disregard for safety inherent in the concept of dual-mode robotics. These suits were masterpieces of mechanical ambiguity, designed with segmented metal endoskeletons that could be retracted and compressed against the interior walls of the costume using complex spring mechanisms activated by a manual cranking process, transforming the autonomous robotic performer into a flimsy, wearable mascot suit capable of hosting a human operator. The engineering challenge was immense, requiring dozens of tiny, tightly wound steel coils and pressure plates to hold the dense mechanical mass back from the suit's core cavity, a fragile containment system that rested dangerously close to the human body. This proprietary technology, championed and closely guarded by William, allowed for unprecedented character interaction and mobility, making the golden duo seem magically alive as they danced with children. But the system held a critical, life-threatening instability. Moisture, sudden movements, or even a strong breath of humidity could cause the internal spring mechanisms to fail catastrophically, releasing the tightly compressed endoskeleton with crushing force back into the center cavity, an event known internally as a springlock failure. The metallic grinding and snapping sound of the failure was instantaneous and irreversible, demonstrating William's willingness to deploy a technology he knew was lethal if exposed to the most common elements of a humid environment, prioritizing the seamless, proprietary nature of the transformation over the absolute safety of the human wearers, thereby injecting an element of silent, ticking danger directly into the vibrant heart of the family diner. In direct response to the inherent vulnerabilities of William's ambitious but reckless engineering, Henry Emily designed and implemented sophisticated protective features centered around child identification and monitoring, most notably the security bracelet system directly linked to the operational programming of the puppet. A tall, slender animatronic intended solely as a mobile guardian and surveillance unit. Henry envisioned this system as a preemptive fence against the growing chaos of large birthday crowds and the lurking, undefinable fear that his partner's technology inspired in him. Every child entering the diner was intended to be issued a light-up wristband containing a simple, low-frequency transmitter chip. The puppet, a figure of melancholic grace adorned with distinctive painted tears and spindly, expressive limbs, was programmed to patrol the perimeter, its internal sensory suite constantly scanning for the signals emitted by these bracelets, effectively creating a real-time, moving map of every child within the defined safety zone. Crucially, the puppet was also equipped with a distress protocol. If the signal from a particular bracelet suddenly disappeared from the system's map, or if an unauthorized entry or exit was detected outside of the normal operation hours, the puppet was programmed to bypass its regular movement paths, exiting the building to follow the last known signal in a desperate attempt to locate the missing child, thereby acting as a failsafe against external threats. This constant, vigilant patrolling, often accompanied by the gentle, repetitive sound of its signature music box, was Henry's profound mechanical statement, an attempt to use robotics not for dazzling performance or dangerous gimmickry, but purely for selfless, enduring protection, a commitment to safeguarding the lives that William Afton, either through negligence or dark intention, appeared increasingly ready to endanger or dismiss. Simultaneously, William Afton was secretly diverting resources and proprietary knowledge into the development of advanced mechanical principles that would later manifest fully in the Funtime animatronics, conducting these secretive experiments in a hidden workshop far removed from Henry's trusting scrutiny. This research was dark, specialized, and held no commercial application for a children's diner. It focused entirely on systems of internal capture and sound mimicry designed specifically for predatory, non-entertainment purposes. William developed highly sophisticated, segmented mechanical suits that possessed internal specialized cavities designed not for human operators or endoskeleton housing, but for the compact storage and concealment of organic matter, utilizing tight, internal clamps and storage tanks intended to secure and rapidly transport material without leaving external evidence. Even more chilling was his work on acoustic analysis and replication. He engineered specialized internal soundboards capable of recording, analyzing, and precisely reproducing complex human vocalizations, not merely simple phrases, but the nuanced tones of a mother calling for her child, or the distressing sounds of human desperation. This advanced sound mimicry technology was created purely as a sophisticated lure, designed to draw unsuspecting victims closer to the animatronic by exploiting their trust through recognizable voices, demonstrating that William's engineering trajectory had already fully broken with commercial ethics and moved into the realm of covert, calculated homicide, utilizing complex, silent motors and specialized pressure sensors to ensure the capture process was swift, efficient, and virtually undetectable, paving the way for the specialized destruction he planned to inflict upon the world he secretly resented. The burgeoning friction between the partners escalated rapidly, fueled by William's profound, corrosive paranoia and his escalating jealousy, which was primarily directed at Henry's stable, idealized family life, culminating in an inevitable slide toward the first violent act. William, increasingly consumed by the secretive nature of his dark, private robotics research, began to view Henry's open, trusting nature and commercial success as a personal affront. Suffering from a deep-seated envy of Henry's domestic tranquility, particularly the genuine affection shared between Henry and his daughter, Charlotte, an innocence that contrasted sharply with William's own cold, troubled domestic situation. This existential jealousy morphed into an obsessive need for control and a dangerous paranoia concerning the secrecy of his proprietary mechanical designs, leading him to believe Henry was somehow attempting to steal or undermine his technological superiority, even though Henry had repeatedly expressed only fascination, not ambition, toward the technical details. The shared workspace grew quiet, replaced by the hushed sounds of William's late-night drilling and wiring in his private sections, the cold, harsh light of his specialized lamps illuminating blueprints detailing complex internal structures that had nothing to do with birthday parties. This descent was marked by an increasing moral ambiguity, transforming William from a brilliant but distant engineer into a deeply dangerous, calculating predator whose technical skill now served a singular, terrifying goal: to destroy the happiness he could not possess. This toxic envy was the catalyst that propelled William to utilize his recently developed, specialized capture technology against Henry's most beloved vulnerability, thereby setting the inescapable stage for the first tragic instance where the seemingly innocent metallic skins of the company's creations would be stained forever by the horrifying reality of a calculated, premeditated murder. The sudden, catastrophic consequence of that simmering rivalry unfolded during a night consumed by a heavy, chilling rain outside the brightly lit facade of the initial Fredbear's location, where Henry's young daughter, Charlotte Emily, known affectionately as Charlie, found herself tragically isolated from the manufactured safety her father had so desperately tried to guarantee. The relentless downpour was not merely background noise. It became an active agent in the unfolding horror, masking sounds and chilling the air while driving everyone indoors toward the perceived warmth and security of the animatronic stage show. Henry, caught up in the operation or distracted by a customer, was unaware that the very system he had designed to protect Charlie had been compromised or disabled, perhaps due to a momentary power fluctuation, or more sinisterly, through a deliberate act of highly specialized sabotage executed by William, who possessed intimate knowledge of the system's protective limitations and its precise failure points. Locked outside, pressed against the wet, cold glass of the establishment's emergency exit, Charlie watched the blurry figures inside, the cheerful lights now feeling like a mocking barrier as the mechanical chirp of her security bracelet remained hauntingly silent, having ceased its vital transmission. This inexplicable lapse in the protective circuitry, a lapse William had engineered or waited for with predatory patience, created the perfect window of opportunity, transforming a moment of innocent childhood exclusion into an immediate, mortal vulnerability. The rhythmic sound of water hitting the pavement emphasized the absolute silence of the protective mechanisms that were supposed to track her location, leaving her utterly exposed to the dark intentions lurking just beyond the radius of the diner's inviting, yellow stage lights, transforming Henry's intended fortress of joy into a prison that kept danger out, but failed entirely to keep innocence safely within. It was into this moment of isolation and vulnerability that William Afton delivered the devastating blow of his long-festering resentment, driving his distinctive, heavy-set purple car slowly through the shimmering rain and purposefully seeking out Henry's exposed child. The vehicle, boxy and undeniably unique beneath the slick sheets of water, served as an immediate, unmistakable signature of his premeditated violence, its low-slung headlights cutting through the gloom, momentarily illuminating the small, frightened figure huddled near the alleyway trash bins. William did not act in a sudden, emotional rage. His movement was calculated, cold, and utterly detached, driven by the profound, sick jealousy that had festered within him regarding Henry's success and domestic happiness, a happiness William felt was unjustly withheld from him. He carried out the murder with the mechanical precision of his own dark engineering, a deliberate, brutal act designed not merely to kill, but to inflict the maximum possible psychological agony upon his partner, transforming the joyful promise of the burgeoning Fazbear brand into a crucible of personal loss and suffering. The swift, silent violence of the encounter ensured there were no witnesses, leaving only the chilling, empty sound of the rain continuing to fall upon the scene, a moment of profound, irreversible cruelty carried out just yards from the vibrant, oblivious sounds of the diner's birthday celebrations. This single, devastating act was the foundational crime of the entire saga, permanently fusing the seemingly innocuous world of family entertainment with the dark, unspeakable stain of pure, purposeful homicide, an act that William executed fully aware of its devastating, targeted emotional consequence. Deep inside the main room, the puppet animatronic, which was Henry's mechanized guardian designed for the sole purpose of protection, received the sudden, critical alert, not from the successful tracking of the bracelet, but from the catastrophic, abrupt disappearance of its signal entirely, triggering its highest distress protocol. Driven by Henry's foundational protective code, the tall, slender automaton, whose primary design flaw was its susceptibility to moisture, began its slow, determined, and mechanically impaired journey toward the external world. The puppet was kept in its large, ornate gift box, constantly serenaded by the soft, repetitive melody of its music box, a mechanism intended to keep its complex internal systems stabilized. Breaking free of its containment, the puppet struggled against the exit door, moving with a jerky, almost desperate persistence, its delicate, articulated joints protesting against the friction of the poorly maintained exterior pathway. The moment it moved beyond the sheltered overhang and into the downpour, the disastrous effects of the rain began immediately. Water streamed across its painted, tear-marked face and seeped into the unprotected seams of its metallic shell, causing crucial internal circuitry to short and seize. Its movements became sluggish, erratic, and painful, each step a struggle as the hydraulic fluid thinned, and the sensitive wiring began to spark silently beneath the surface, slowing its pace to an agonizingly deliberate crawl. The continuous, soaking moisture shorted the connection to its internal stabilizing music box, causing the gentle melody to cut out and sputter intermittently, a haunting mechanical gasp that signaled the system's imminent failure. Yet the puppet continued to push forward, driven purely by the last, dying echoes of Henry's protective programming, determined to reach the coordinates of the vanished signal regardless of the mechanical consequences to its own rapidly degrading chassis. When the structurally damaged puppet finally reached the cold, sodden spot in the alley, its internal systems sputtering and failing beneath the relentless deluge, it slowly and mechanically knelt over Charlie's lifeless body, executing the final, devastating act of its protective protocol, which, in its failure, became the moment of horrifying metaphysical success. As the chassis bowed, depositing the last sputtering remnants of its music box onto the wet ground beside the child, the intense, overwhelming force of emotional agony surrounding the event, the sheer, unprocessed, searing pain of Henry's loss, Charlie's fear, and William's dark triumph, created the unique, volatile energy known in this hidden world as remnant. This concept of remnant is not merely a ghost or spiritual residue. It is the raw, concentrated essence of human pain and unresolved suffering, a powerful energy field that forces a permanent, inescapable bond between a human soul and the cold, metallic structure of an endoskeleton. In that moment of absolute mechanical failure and profound human tragedy, Charlie's innocent, tormented soul, unable to find release due to the intensity of the traumatic murder and the proximity of the protective metallic shell, merged violently and indelibly with the puppet's damaged chassis. Her spirit did not simply inhabit the robot, it fused with the internal wiring and the segmented metal frame, transforming the sophisticated programming into a vehicle for eternal suffering and a chilling, new form of consciousness. The cold, mechanical eyes of the puppet flickered to life, no longer governed by Henry's benign code, but by the devastating, perpetual pain of the child's final moments, establishing the foundational principle of haunting that would define every subsequent tragedy within the Fazbear legacy, demonstrating that profound, targeted agony could create life where only machinery existed before. Now imbued with Charlie's vengeful and profoundly protective spirit, the puppet ceased to be merely a robot and became the central, defining entity of agony within the burgeoning tragedy, unknowingly preparing the grim path for future victims to find their own form of tormented rest through similar spiritual possession. The fusion of soul and machine had irrevocably altered the puppet's function. Henry's original code for surveillance and protection was amplified and corrupted by the intense desire for vengeance against the one who had caused such suffering, transforming its protective instinct into a fierce, almost territorial guarding of the innocent. Charlie's soul, trapped within the cold, black and white shell, carried the memory of the rain, the fear, and the unmistakable image of the purple car, creating a relentless internal drive to identify and stop her killer. Furthermore, this initial, catastrophic act of possession established the necessary spiritual precedent. The raw power of Remnant, demonstrated by Charlie's successful merger, created a blueprint for future hauntings. The puppet, moving now with a silent, sorrowful purpose, carried within it the potent emotional blueprint necessary to allow other souls who would later meet their end within the Fazbear locations to similarly cling to the metallic remains of the animatronics, effectively granting them a form of mechanical immortality fueled by their own intense suffering. Charlie, the first victim and the original keeper of this dark secret, had unknowingly laid the foundation for an entire chorus of tormented spirits, ensuring that the technology designed for joy would forever be bound by the echoes of those who died seeking safety, making her mechanical cage both a prison of pain and a beacon of protective, unending resolve. The immediate aftermath of Charlie's murder forced a structural shift in the franchise's presentation, leading to the establishment of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the true stage for the infamous missing children incident, a location characterized by its desperate, poorly executed attempt to erase the sins of the past through cheap rebranding and severe cuts to operational safety. This second iteration of the restaurant was a study in institutional neglect. The building itself felt cavernous and slightly rundown, despite its new coat of bright paint, reflecting the company's underlying financial desperation and abysmal lack of competent management. Security was minimal and largely unsupervised, relying on outdated camera systems that often failed or were intentionally ignored by bored night staff, creating vast, unsupervised blind spots perfectly suited for William Afton's renewed dark purposes. The new cast of characters, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, were standard, less technologically ambitious animatronics, lacking the dangerous spring-lock mechanisms but still possessing the basic, sturdy endoskeletons that William knew could serve a specific, horrific purpose. The overall environment felt cheapened, a desperate commercial exercise designed to distract the public and the original partner from the foundational tragedy, succeeding only in creating a fertile ground where William could continue his secretive, morally bankrupt work unimpeded. This move to a larger, less controlled environment gave William the anonymity and the logistical cover he needed, transforming the company's new, sprawling failure into his perfect hunting ground, far removed from Henry's grieving, watchful eye and the now profoundly haunted presence of the original Springlock-laden diner. William Afton meticulously leveraged the nostalgic familiarity of the defunct Spring Bonnie suit as the seemingly benign decoy necessary to execute the missing children incident, an insidious act of misdirection that allowed him to lure 5 unsuspecting children, Gabriel, Susie, Jeremy, Fritz, and crucially, Cassidy, away from the boisterous, brightly lit main dining area. The decommissioning of the original Fredbear's location meant the Springlock suits were officially removed from performance rotation and stored away, making the sight of the golden, grinning Spring Bonnie costume a sudden, highly individualized novelty perfectly calculated to appeal to the adventurous curiosity of young children. William, wearing the suit with practiced ease, his movements slow and persuasive, used his commanding familiarity with the character's presentation to foster a false sense of trust, guiding the 5 victims through the less trafficked hallways toward a specialized, unmarked security area. This room, known ominously as the safe room or panic room, was a critical, forgotten architectural feature of the initial building design, deliberately hidden behind a false wall or sealed door, and crucially, programmed to be entirely inaccessible to the basic pathfinding circuits of the main animatronics, and more importantly, invisible on the public security surveillance feeds. Once inside this sound-dampened hidden space, the golden suit transformed from a harmless, fuzzy icon of childhood fun into a silent, terrifying instrument of violence, allowing William to commit the heinous crime with chilling efficiency and total operational isolation, exploiting the deep, inherent trust children place in the established characters of the brand. Following the sequence of the murders within the hidden confines of the safe room, William executed the second, equally monstrous phase of his plan: the concealment of the victims by stuffing the small, broken bodies into the hollowed cavities of the 4 active stage animatronics: Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie the Rabbit, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate Fox, while the 5th victim, Cassidy the Vengeful Spirit, became inexplicably and uniquely linked to the silent, ephemeral form of the Golden Freddy suit or phantom entity. The physical act of concealment was brutal and clinical, utilizing the internal structure of the standard endoskeletons, which, while not spring-lock, still possessed enough empty volume within their thick plastic and fabric shells to house the remains, a horrifying fusion of flesh and wire. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, and Fritz were forced into the respective chassis of the primary band, their presence irrevocably fusing their essence with the internal machinery, creating a lasting, internal contamination. Cassidy's fate, however, was subtly different and far more powerful. Her agony, perhaps the most intense of the 5, did not immediately fuse with a physical, functioning animatronic, but instead anchored itself to the ethereal, phantom version of Fredbear, the second golden character, an entity that lacked a permanent physical presence, but functioned as a terrifying manifestation of pure, focused vengeance. This division of the bodies across the core mechanical figures was highly strategic. It ensured the complete disappearance of the victims from the public eye, and most importantly, infused the entire active roster of the restaurant with the necessary fuel for possession, effectively transforming William's disposal method into the very engine of the haunting that would torment him for decades. The immediate consequence of William's horrifying disposal method was a catastrophic and ultimately failing police investigation, which stalled entirely due to the complete lack of physical evidence, allowing the incident to be tragically and unsatisfactorily written off as a cold case of 5 missing persons. Investigators searched the premises, but the simple fact that the bodies were not merely hidden, but actively incorporated into the restaurant's permanent fixtures, the very animatronics performing on stage, rendered all standard search tactics useless. The highly effective concealment within the rigid, scented shells meant that search teams overlooked the most obvious, yet impossible hiding places. However, as the days turned into weeks, the presence of the decaying organic matter began to exert undeniable physical effects on the environment and the mechanical performers themselves, leading to persistent, disturbing reports among the cleaning staff and kitchen employees. Detailed employee records and later testimonies noted a pervasive, nauseating foul odor emanating distinctly from the main stage area, an aggressive scent of decay that no amount of industrial cleaning product or air freshener could mask, often mistakenly attributed to backed-up sewer lines or spoiled food. Furthermore, employees observed strange, dark, viscous fluid leakage and staining around the joints and eye sockets of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, unsettling organic residue that defied explanation, prompting management to issue increasingly absurd and desperate repair logs that focused on covering up the evidence rather than confronting the horrific reality of the mechanical contamination. The failed investigation thus gave way to a persistent, sickening reality for the employees, a hidden, pervasive corruption that haunted the very atmosphere of the pizzeria, ensuring the tragedy was not forgotten, only buried beneath layers of management denial and the lingering smell of death. The overwhelming agony and concentrated trauma of the children's violent deaths served as the massive injection of remnant necessary to fuse their fragmented souls permanently into the cold, metal endoskeletons, transforming the standard family entertainers into intensely hostile, vengeful entities singularly obsessed with capturing and destroying the nearest adult security guard. This process of remnant infusion, perfected by Charlie's initial possession of the puppet, was replicated 5 times over, filling the core animatronics with a collective, blind fury. The children's souls, having died in immense pain and terror at the hands of an adult in a familiar costume, retained only the fragmented, terrifying memory of their final moments, focusing all their spiritual energy on the one figure that remotely resembled their killer. The solitary night guard, positioned in the darkness and carrying the symbolic weight of an authority figure. Their movements, once programmed for benign stage performances, became erratic, silent hunts driven by mechanical instinct corrupted by spiritual vengeance, utilizing the physical strength of the endoskeleton to pursue their perceived threat through the narrow hallways. They did not understand the guard was innocent. They saw only an adult, isolated in the dark, and believed that forcing the night guard into one of their own empty suits, a cruel mirroring of their own terrible fate, would be the only path to justice, ensuring that the company's most recognizable characters became vessels of eternal suffering and aggressive, lethal confusion, forever linking the childhood spectacle of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to a silent, nightly hunt for murderous retribution. The classic Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, now recognized retrospectively as the environment featured in the original Five Nights at Freddy's experience, represents the dreadful, unsettling zenith of the initial haunting, where the 4 standard animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, exhibit a frightening, highly sophisticated sentience entirely driven by the concentrated, internalized remnant of the missing children incident victims. These are no longer simple machines running on routine programming. They are complex vessels of spiritual and mechanical corruption, their internal processes overridden by the desperate, fragmented minds of the 5 deceased children, resulting in an aggressive, predatory nocturnal behavior that bypasses every safety measure built into their systems. Their movements across the low-lit, decaying facility are coordinated and deliberate, fueled by the collective agony of their violent end and the singular, misunderstood drive for revenge. The faint sounds of their metallic footsteps and the distant, garbled laughter caught on the static-laced surveillance feeds serve as auditory proof of their conscious manipulation of the environment, demonstrating an awareness of the camera blind spots and the predictable patterns of the human security guard. This heightened, malicious intelligence is the direct result of the soul-machine fusion. The children's powerful suffering has transformed the standard stage robots into perfectly engineered killing machines, operating under a terrifying, unified motive focused on containment and retribution, perpetually reliving the terrifying moments of their death and reacting with explosive violence to the mere presence of an adult within their territory. Their eyes, once bright plastic, now possess a chilling, reflective gleam in the dark, signaling the vengeful, focused minds trapped beneath the thick, dusty shells. The behavior exhibited by each of the active animatronics during the night hours serves as a chilling, externalized manifestation of the individualized suffering and psychological state of the child soul trapped within, creating a unique pattern of stalking and pursuit. Foxy, housed in the dilapidated pirate cove and prone to sudden, violent bursts of movement, embodies the pure anxiety and desperate distress of the child's soul, likely Fritz, trapped inside, rushing out of his darkened corner in manic, unpredictable sprints toward the security office door, the distinctive sound of his pounding, metallic footsteps echoing the panic of flight and fear. His vulnerability seems to require constant monitoring, represented by the camera focused on his stage, lest he break free in a sudden, frantic dash. Chica the chicken, often observed lingering in the kitchen, where the sounds of clanking pots and pans hint at her restless, confused movement, and Bonnie the rabbit, who stalks the main halls with an unnervingly methodical, steady pace, reflect a more deliberate, purposeful attempt to seek egress from their containment. Their slow but inevitable progression toward the guard station symbolizing their relentless desire to escape the confines of their metallic prison. Bonnie, often the first to move and possessing a disturbing, wide-eyed stare, represents a focused determination, while Chica's movements are often characterized by small, unsettling spasms, suggesting the internal discomfort of the organic material pressing against the endoskeleton. Each measured step, each sudden rush, is a programmed expression of childhood trauma filtered through the cold, unforgiving lens of the machine, a behavioral symptom of their inability to find peace or understanding in their haunted mechanical existence. Standing apart from the tangible, physical threat of the main band, Golden Freddy functions as a uniquely spectral and devastating entity, representing the concentrated, purest fury of the most vengeful spirit, Cassidy, the fifth victim, whose presence is not bound by the physical limitations of the building. Unlike the other four, Golden Freddy lacks a detectable path, often materializing instantly within the small office space or shimmering into view at the end of a long hallway. Its slumped, vacant appearance and deep, hollow stare serving as a horrifying, silent psychological weapon. Its power is demonstrably non-physical, yet profoundly mechanical. Its sudden, impossible manifestation is frequently preceded by intense auditory and visual distortions, causing the surveillance monitors to flicker violently and the electrical systems of the entire establishment to temporarily collapse into chaos. This capability to spontaneously crash the digital and power systems of the facility suggests that Cassidy's soul, infused with overwhelming remnant and focused aggression, possesses a powerful, almost supernatural command over the underlying mechanics and software of the Fazbear infrastructure, treating the very electrical grid as an extension of its own immense spiritual power. Golden Freddy is the embodiment of pure, unyielding retribution, a silent, powerful manifestation of concentrated rage that seeks not just to capture the guard, but to inflict a deeper, more permanent psychological torment, utilizing the ghost-like nature of its appearance to maintain an atmosphere of constant, destabilizing terror within the fragile confines of the night office. The critical mechanical design flaw exploited by the confused, terrified children's souls is their singular, lethal misinterpretation of the night guard's presence, believing they must comfort or save the perceived naked endoskeleton by forcefully stuffing the human body into a spare Freddy Fazbear suit stored in the back room, a horrifying act of mistaken protection. The animatronic's internal programming dictates that costumed characters should not be seen by children as exposed endoskeletons, which are deemed frightening and inappropriate. Therefore, any exposed metal frame, which is how they perceive the unprotected human security guard, lacking the necessary identification scent or costume, must be covered immediately. This programming is fatally corrupted by the soul's inability to distinguish between the cold, inert metal of a spare endoskeleton and the soft, vulnerable flesh and bone of a living human being. Their attempt to help or correct the perceived anomaly results in the guard being violently compressed into the narrow, stiff cavity of the spare costume, leading to instantaneous death by endoskeletal crushing. The complex, tightly packed mass of wires, hydraulic pistons, and metallic crossbeams within the costume's interior cavity simply cannot accommodate the volume of a human body, reducing the horrifying act of misguided rescue into a gruesome mechanical execution, ensuring that the very protective instinct of the children's souls becomes the lethal mechanism of the night guard's demise, sealing the fate of any adult who attempts to coexist with their tormented, mechanical vengeance. The establishment's overall physical and environmental decline, characterized most notably by the critical scarcity of resources like the perpetually limited power supply and the visible decrepit state of the environment, serves as the physical testament to how the pervasive, chronic trauma of the haunting has physically corrupted the facility over time, effectively transforming the restaurant into a sealed, deteriorating tomb. The constantly depleting power reserves, the single most immediate threat to the guard's survival, are not merely an accounting issue but a constant, mechanical manifestation of the facility's decay, reflecting the strain placed on the system by the irregular, electrically intense movements of the haunted animatronics, which draw far more energy than their original programming intended. Every flicker of the lights, every desperate slam of a security door, consumes a vital, unreplenishable resource, mirroring the draining, spiritual corrosion within the walls. The visible physical deterioration, dust coating the stages, grime on the tiles, the general atmosphere of neglect, highlights the managerial abandonment and the psychological toll the hidden tragedy has taken on the location. The very structure of the pizzeria is now fused with the agony. The physical space has become a prison designed to contain the restless souls, the failing infrastructure serving only to seal the night guard inside with their tormentors, making the classic Freddy Fazbear's Pizza less a restaurant and more a carefully sealed mausoleum, where the echoes of 5 children's pain resonate endlessly through the low, buzzing hum of the failing fluorescent lights. In a desperate, ill-conceived attempt to sanitize the brand and shed the oppressive shadow of the missing children incident, Fazbear Entertainment launched the second, expansive iteration of the restaurant Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, characterized by a rushed, high-budget reboot that introduced the gleaming, seemingly benign toy animatronics. These new figures, Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, and Mangle, were marketed as a massive technological leap forward, incorporating advanced facial recognition software and linking directly to criminal databases, a system explicitly designed by management to protect children by identifying and alerting authorities to potential threats and predators. This ironically sinister upgrade was predicated upon William Afton's earlier, hidden engineering principles. He had long understood the power of localized, specialized surveillance and digital threat assessment, and now the company was implementing a sanitized, commercial version of his foundational work. The toy animatronics possessed clean, polished shells and bright, innocent plastic eyes, masking the sophisticated cameras embedded within their faces, which constantly scan the crowd, processing demographic data and searching for behavioral anomalies, a surveillance network that created an illusion of total safety. The logic behind the new software was chillingly flawed. It taught the machines to distrust all adults, viewing any sudden, unfamiliar face or suspicious movement as a potential perpetrator, creating a pervasive atmosphere of mechanized suspicion directly at the core of the supposed family entertainment, ensuring that the technology designed to prevent tragedy would ultimately become the very tool that amplified the fear and confusion during the inevitable haunting. The pristine aesthetics and technological ambition of the new location stood in sharp, unsettling contrast to the deep, lingering corruption that lay just out of sight. While the new toys performed under the brilliant, unblinking stage lights, the original, deeply corrupted animatronics from the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, now officially known as the Wizards, were relegated to the claustrophobic darkness of the back room designated for parts and service, their severely damaged and deteriorated state serving as a stark, horrifying reflection of years of profound neglect and the physical violence sustained from William's earlier, mechanical tampering during and after the murders. These 4 bodies, withered Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, were not fully decommissioned. They were salvaged for their core endoskeletons and usable legacy parts, creating a dark, oily junkyard of broken machines intended for later reuse. Their physical damage was intense and highly visible. Withered Bonnie was missing his entire faceplate and left arm, exposing the raw, tangled wiring beneath. Withered Chica's hands were removed, and her jaw was permanently dislocated, giving her a perpetual, silent scream. And withered Foxy suffered massive damage to his leg joints and torso armor. This state of disrepair was not random wear and tear. It was the direct, physical consequence of the agonizing process of having the children's bodies forced inside, and the subsequent, chaotic mechanical responses of the infused remnant. The Wizards represented the open, festering wound of the company's past, stored in a perpetually dark room where the sounds of shifting metal and faint, guttural mechanical groans served as a chilling reminder that the core physical evidence of the missing children incident remained trapped within these grotesque, fragmented shells. Crucially, the attack behavior of the withered animatronics during the night shift in the second location is fundamentally and terrifyingly different from the mechanical, threat assessment aggression of the new toys. The Wizards' attack based on a deep, primal and ingrained hatred linked directly to the physical trauma of their possession, displaying an immediate recognition of the night guard, who is strongly implied to be Michael Afton, William's own son, or perhaps merely someone carrying a familial scent or visual resemblance to William himself. Unlike the toys, who initially rely on the flawed facial recognition system, the Withered seem to bypass all logical programming and move with a focused, raw violence born from spiritual memory. When Withered Bonnie moves down the hall, his missing face seems to communicate a silent scream of recognition and accusation, confirming that the souls within instantly identify the guard as a familiar agent of their suffering. This hatred is pure and unfiltered, driven by the 5 victims' collective spiritual memory of their killer and the overwhelming agony associated with the Purple Man. The intense focus of their pursuit, the desperate need to reach the guard and inflict their version of vengeance, demonstrates that the remnant within them, though fragmented, is capable of processing sensory information far beyond the basic programming of the toy models, proving that the deepest, most dangerous haunting is not driven by technological flaws, but by the personal, burning desire for revenge against the Afton lineage. The puppet, now the constant, active center of the entire Fazbear haunting, continued its silent, aggressive reign in the new facility, acting as the memory core and the spiritual conduit that ensured the mechanical corruption eventually spread beyond the Withereds and into the new, technologically advanced toys. Housed in the central prize corner and still driven by Charlie's protective yet vengeful remnant, the puppet's presence acted as a massive, localized source of spiritual energy, emitting an invisible influence that pervaded the entire structure. The night staff were required to constantly wind the music box, a desperate, flawed attempt to contain Charlie's aggressive spirit. When the music stopped, the puppet would exit its box, its goal no longer just defense, but the spreading of the knowledge of agony. This relentless spectral influence, the transference of intense emotional suffering, slowly but inevitably corrupted the pristine programming of the toy animatronics. The toys, designed to identify threats, began to misinterpret the puppet's spectral distress and the pervasive, underlying remnant of the Withereds as originating from the innocent adults on staff, causing their advanced facial recognition software to malfunction spectacularly. The shared spectral influence thus caused the toys to confuse all adults as potential predators or their own killer, leading to an aggressive, synchronized breakdown in their core functions and ensuring that the entire roster of animatronics, new and old, technological and haunted, were unified in their deadly pursuit of the Night Guard. Despite the massive investment and initial buzz, the ambitious second Freddy Fazbear's Pizza ultimately failed not because of budget shortfalls or poor marketing, but due to a final, inescapable combination of mechanical failure and the grotesque, undeniable revelation of the original tragedy. The initial decline was marked by another, smaller incident, possibly related to the toys malfunctioning catastrophically during the daytime and violently attacking staff or even adult patrons, resulting in immediate closure and massive public outcry against the brand's renewed commitment to safety. However, the final, fatal blow was the devastating rediscovery of the original sin, the undeniable, lingering evidence that the withered animatronics, stored away in their dark maintenance room, still harbored the original bodies and consequently emitted the same horrifying, pervasive foul odor that had haunted the previous location. When technical staff attempted to seriously salvage the Withereds for their base endoskeletons, the horrifying truth of the concealed remains was either partially revealed or the concentrated stench of decay became too intense to ignore, forcing the management to definitively abandon the expansive, compromised location. Recognizing the sturdy, haunted nature of the Withereds' endoskeletons, management made the cynical, cost-saving decision to minimally refurbish the corrupted metal frames and the associated remnant, repurposing them for use in a future, smaller, less ambitious establishment, tragically leading directly back to the very first, deeply haunted location. The environment seen in the 5 Nights at Freddy's experience, ensuring that the dark core of the brand would continue its spectral reign. The seemingly ordinary setting of the Afton residence, particularly the crying child's bedroom featured in the frightening, desperate nights of the fourth location experience, was in reality far from a peaceful shelter. It was a tightly controlled psychological testing ground, a focus point for surveillance and the deliberate induction of concentrated psychological horror orchestrated by William Afton himself. The child, known as the Crying Child or simply Evan, existed in a state of perpetual manufactured terror, his small bedroom transformed into a controlled arena where his fear could be observed and analyzed. The four main points of entry, two hallway doors, the closet, and the bed, became the vectors for his nightly torment, a confined space where the child had to constantly monitor every angle for the phantom threat of monstrous animatronics. The room was secretly wired. Subtle audio cues, the precise volume of the animatronics' movements, and the specific timing of their appearances were all elements of a clinical experiment designed to map the boundaries of the child's reaction to extreme stress and phobia. William, obsessed with the relationship between intense agony, fear, and the formation of remnant, utilized his own home and his youngest son's developing mind as the ultimate horrific laboratory, watching and listening from unseen surveillance points to document the escalating breakdown of the child's sense of safety. The crying child's existence within that house was defined by the terrifying realization that the walls and the darkness offered no true protection, only a controlled observation field where his deepest fears were being systematically weaponized against him by the very person who should have offered solace. The massive, terrifying nightmare animatronics that stalk the crying child's room are not, in fact, physical functioning robots, but rather incredibly powerful, vivid, and recurring hallucinations experienced by the deeply traumatized child, systematically triggered by a combination of sensory input, heavy medication, and the deep-seated, constant phobia surrounding the establishment's menacing mascots. These nightmarish figures, Nightmare Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the devastating Nightmare Fredbear, are exaggerated, horrific manifestations of the child's own crippling fear, appearing not as smooth mechanical devices but as grotesque, twisted parodies of the original characters, complete with massive claws, multiple rows of needle-sharp teeth, and decaying, torn exoskeletons that seem to defy stable physical form. The sensory environment of the bedroom, the rhythmic ticking of the alarm clock, the distinct sound of deep, synthetic breathing, and the sudden shift from total darkness to blinding flashlight are all carefully integrated triggers that initiate and sustain the hallucinations. Furthermore, the sheer, visceral detail of the nightmares suggests an exposure to highly precise, disturbing mechanical imagery, perhaps derived from William's research notes or early funtime blueprints, feeding the child's subconscious mind with the blueprints for his own destruction. These phantoms serve as psychological defense mechanisms gone terribly wrong, wherein the child's subconscious mind attempts to process and prepare for the violence it anticipates, inadvertently creating highly lethal, persistent, and entirely unreal predators that relentlessly attack the foundations of his fragile sanity throughout the agonizing nocturnal hours. The true nature of the setting is subtly revealed through chilling hidden details discovered within the brief minigames and the bedroom environment itself, strongly suggesting that the crying child is experiencing these intense nightmares not from his healthy, active home, but from the isolated, clinical vulnerability of a hospital bed following a major injury, or while simultaneously being actively monitored by William Afton in a controlled, adjacent space. Static images glimpsed in the transition screens reveal the presence of items that violently contrast with a typical child's room. A vase of flowers placed beside the bed, often associated with a hospital stay or recovery. Small pill bottles or specialized medical equipment indistinctly visible on a nearby stand. And the cold, unyielding metallic presence of what appears to be a specialized monitoring device. This subtle, pervasive evidence suggests that the main gameplay sequence of FNAF 4 occurs during the critical days following the traumatic cranial injury, meaning the intense, recurring terror is a combination of neurological damage, medical intervention, and the child's subconscious working through the immediate, agonizing trauma of the bite itself. The presence of the singular, faint footsteps outside the bedroom door, heard exclusively during the transition screens, hints at the constant, invasive surveillance of William Afton, who may be using auditory sensors to gauge his son's physical and psychological state, treating the final, critical days of his child's life as the final, ethically compromised stage of his terrifying experiment into the neurological effects of overwhelming agony. The role of Michael Afton, the crying child's older brother, is undeniably established as the primary, relentless source of physical and psychological torment, manifesting this cruelty by constantly wearing a frightening, customized foxy mask to terrorize his already fragile younger brother. Michael's bullying, often cruel and thoughtless, was the immediate, localized fuel that transformed the crying child's general anxiety about the Fazbear characters into a crippling, profound phobia. The older brother, along with his group of insensitive friends, treated the child's fear as a form of entertainment, using the ubiquitous presence of the restaurant mascots as tools for deliberate psychological destabilization. The foxy mask, which Michael uses as his signature disguise, is particularly significant. It is a cheap, mass-produced item from the diner, but when worn by his massive, intimidating brother, it becomes a terrifying, physical manifestation of the child's fear of the animatronics becoming mobile and lethal, blurring the line between fantasy and painful reality. This sustained, targeted terror, driven by Michael's negligence and cruelty, fueled the child's intense, consuming phobia to a point of no return, creating an environment of explosive, uncontrolled anxiety that directly, tragically motivated the central, irreversible trauma of the bite of 83. Michael, unaware of his father's scientific observation or the catastrophic implications of his actions, became the unwitting, immediate physical instrument in the unfolding tragedy, transforming a family dynamic into a laboratory experiment in phobia reinforcement. Perhaps the most chilling revelation regarding the true nature of the Afton family home is the geographic reality that the property directly borders a hidden, expansive underground facility, later revealed to be William's advanced testing ground, Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, a fact which confirms that the terror experienced by the crying child was not accidental neurosis, but a calculated, deliberately manufactured horror amplified by his father's nearby active mechanical experiments. The close proximity of the house to the highly specialized subterranean laboratory, often accessed through a secret route or hidden service elevator, confirms that William was not merely observing his son's fear remotely. He was actively creating and projecting the source of that fear. The metallic noises, the distant, muffled voices, and the specific sound profiles of the nightmare animatronics may have been carefully engineered auditory simulations piped into the child's room from the facility next door, or perhaps even highly sophisticated, specialized sound generators designed to induce anxiety and hallucinations based on the research conducted underground. This spatial arrangement reveals the ultimate scale of William Afton's cruelty. He utilized his own child's developing mind and his home as a controlled ecological experiment, leveraging the advanced, predatory mechanics being developed for the Funtime animatronics to create a perfect, contained environment of psychological distress, ensuring that the crying child's every moment was overshadowed by the horrifying, engineered reality of his father's true, dark work. The central, agonizing incident, permanently etched into the corporate memory as the bite of 83, occurred during a celebratory birthday party at the original Fredbear's family diner, an environment where the crying child's pre-existing, crippling phobia of the animatronics reached its definitive, lethal peak, while he was surrounded by the terrifyingly familiar golden Springlock mascots. The diner, despite the earlier tragedies, was buzzing with the loud, chaotic energy of a typical children's event, the overwhelming sensory input, the shrieking laughter, the flashing stage lights, and the mechanical, repetitive music, combining to push the already unstable child to the brink of a complete emotional breakdown. Every corner of the room seemed to hold the silent, judging presence of a grinning mechanical beast, particularly the tall, intimidating Fredbear, the main focus of the stage. For the crying child, the golden suits were not merely performers. They were the physical embodiment of the nightmares his father had engineered and his brother had reinforced, creating a state of hypervigilance and absolute terror that made the fun, celebratory environment feel like a suffocating cage. The fear, constantly reinforced and never addressed, manifested in uncontrolled weeping and desperate clinging, signaling a child on the verge of a panic attack who was utterly incapable of distinguishing between the benign, performing machine and the monstrous phantoms that stalked his nighttime imagination, making the brightly lit party a stage set for the inevitable, horrifying collision of engineered fear and mechanical instability. It was in this emotionally explosive environment that Michael Afton, driven by a cruel blend of youthful insensitivity and years of habitual torment, decided to execute the ultimate escalation of his bullying, joining his friends in seizing his younger brother, lifting the flailing child, and with a casual, shocking disregard for the danger, forcing the crying child's head directly inside the massive, open, singing jaw of the performing Fredbear animatronic for a little kiss. This act was witnessed by a crowd of children and stunned adults, a moment of reckless abandon transformed instantaneously into an indelible horror show. The group of teenagers laughed, momentarily oblivious to the catastrophic danger inherent in the sophisticated, yet fragile springlock mechanism, relying on their belief that the machine was just a harmless, costumed figure. They lifted the small body high above their heads, positioning the crying child's face directly between the massive upper and lower sections of Fredbear's articulated metallic mouth, a space designed only to accommodate air and sound, not human anatomy. The sheer weight of the child's body being supported and then suddenly placed upon the internal jaw mechanism was an immense, unforeseen stressor upon the finely tuned springlock system, a precise application of external force that the brittle, delicate containment coils were not designed to withstand, initiating the mechanical process of destruction that the partners had known since the conception of the technology was always just one misstep away. The horrifying sequence of events that followed the forceful placement of the child's head inside the suit was instantaneous and irreversible, demonstrating the fatal instability inherent in William's proprietary springlock design. The crying child's uncontrolled tears and the sudden, severe mechanical stress from the weight and pressure triggered an immediate, catastrophic internal failure, causing the specialized internal locking mechanism to snap, violently slamming Fredbear's powerful, articulated jaws down onto the child's small, vulnerable head. The intrusion of even a minute amount of moisture, the raw, panicked tears, was the specific, critical factor that caused the tightly wound steel spring coils within the suit to weaken and instantly give way, releasing the compressed, sharp-edged segments of the dense metal endoskeleton. The resulting sound was not a mechanical hum, but a terrifying, grinding crunch of metal against bone, the heavy, servo-driven jaw of the performing automaton crushing the child's skull with devastating, concentrated force. Blood immediately mixed with the yellow plastic of the animatronic, staining the cheerful, brightly lit stage in a moment of unimaginable public brutality. The catastrophic springlock failure transformed the technological marvel into a specialized instrument of instantaneous destruction, fulfilling the latent, dangerous potential that had existed since William first designed the dual-purpose suits, tragically confirming Henry's worst, most latent fears about the inherent lethality of their mechanical collaboration. The irreversible mechanical violence inflicted by the springlock failure resulted in immediate, catastrophic brain trauma, leading directly to the crying child's death shortly thereafter as he lay in agonizing stillness in the sterile silence of the hospital environment. The subsequent minigames detail the slow, painful decline, focusing on the distorted, fading vision and the child's desperate pleas for recognition from his guilt-ridden brother. This final period is marked by the devastating, whispered dialogue that haunts the event. The phrase, "I will put you back together," spoken by an unseen presence, strongly suggesting a profound, desperate promise made either by Henry Emily, in his capacity as a friend and mechanical visionary who understood the core relationship between soul and machine, or more chillingly, by William Afton himself. If spoken by Henry, it was a vow of remembrance, and a mechanical attempt to memorialize the child's innocence. If spoken by William, however, the promise takes on a far darker, more scientific connotation, an early, desperate vow to understand the processes of consciousness and revival through artificial means, using the power of remnant, thereby transforming his dead son into the ultimate, heartbreaking motivation for his future, morally bankrupt experimentation. Regardless of the speaker, the promise hung over the child's final moments, defining his tragic end not as a moment of rest, but as the beginning of a terrifying, mechanized spiritual assignment, destined to be revisited and re-engineered in the years to come. The ultimate conclusion of this devastating family tragedy cemented William Afton's final, irreversible descent into sociopathy, fundamentally motivating him to seek not just engineering mastery, but absolute immortality and control over the very process of death through his specialized remnant experiments. The loss of his youngest son, an event directly caused by the mechanical flaw of his own design and the cruel negligence of his eldest, triggered not regret, but a terrifying clinical obsession with circumventing the biological limits of mortality. William now viewed death not as an end, but as a scientific problem to be solved, focusing his dark genius entirely on how the soul could be trapped, contained, and reused within metal endoskeletons, thereby ensuring that life, however tormented, could be perpetually sustained. Simultaneously, Michael Afton, the older brother and direct cause of the mechanical failure, was left with an unbearable, lifelong burden of guilt, a devastating psychological wound that would ultimately define his entire adult existence and set him on a winding, decades-long quest for atonement. Michael's path forward became an obsessive mission to undo the darkness his father created, to confront the horrors born from the animatronics, and perhaps most urgently, to finally confront and release the tormented souls he helped imprison, creating a profound, inescapable conflict where the father seeks endless life through darkness, and the son seeks impossible forgiveness through confronting that darkness head-on. Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental, a sprawling, highly specialized subterranean complex, is ultimately revealed not as a commercial entertainment venue, but as the true, horrifying nexus of William Afton's dark ambitions. A secret underground operation constructed explicitly for the clinical collection of raw spiritual energy, or remnant, through the highly sophisticated capture and internal storage of children. This massive, hidden facility was cynically funded by Fazbear Entertainment, which believed it was investing in a cutting-edge animatronic rental and party service to be deployed only after final testing, unaware that William was using their resources and public trust to build his personal research laboratory. The very architecture of the building, the low ceilings, the heavily pressurized vent systems, and the isolated, sterile presentation rooms, was designed not for customer flow, but for contained experimentation and remote observation, allowing William to control the environment from a hidden, centralized control room. His central goal, driven by the death of his youngest son, was the precise, scientific harvesting of agony. The facility's primary function was to lure children to isolated points, capture them with highly efficient internal mechanisms, and then hold them inside the animatronics long enough for their intense, final emotions to infuse and stabilize the remnant within the endoskeleton metal, creating the essential fuel for William's dream of mechanized immortality. The entire location was a monumental technological cover-up, leveraging the facade of family fun to mask a highly sophisticated, industrial-scale attempt at harvesting the life force of innocent victims. The Funtime animatronics, specifically Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, the silent dancer Ballora, and the colossal circus baby, are mechanical marvels that utilize highly sophisticated internal mechanical features designed explicitly for luring, tracking, and holding children, a predatory specialization that far surpasses the basic, simplistic complexity of the traditional pizzeria bots. These new machines, sleek and brightly colored, represent the full realization of William's dark, proprietary engineering, designed from their core processors outward to execute targeted lethal capture. Funtime Freddy, for instance, possesses internal speakers capable of mimicking the voices of parents to draw children closer, while his right hand features specialized, silent joints designed to articulate and grasp firmly. Circus Baby's most terrifying internal feature is a large, segmented claw, spring-loaded and hidden within her torso cavity, capable of extending and retracting with rapid force to seize and contain a child within her hollow body. Ballora, designed with high-sensitivity sound detectors, possesses the ability to move through the dark with unsettling grace, utilizing sound rather than sight to track her prey. Each Funtime character is built with unique internal storage tanks and pressure sensors, confirming their primary function is internal concealment, a mechanical architecture that moves beyond entertainment entirely and into the cold, clinical efficiency of the specialized hunter, demonstrating William's ultimate betrayal of Henry's vision and his total dedication to the science of engineered homicide and soul capture. In the ultimate, horrifying twist of poetic justice and mechanical fate, Circus Baby, the central figure of the facility and the most technologically advanced captor, tragically fulfilled her programmed function against her creator's own family. She was designed by William to isolate and capture a single child, and this first, unwitting victim became his own daughter, Elizabeth Afton, who ignored her father's desperate, repeated warnings to stay far away from the machine. William, deeply aware of Baby's capture programming and her internal mechanism, had prohibited Elizabeth from ever approaching the charismatic, ice cream dispensing automaton, perhaps recognizing the terrifying inevitability of his own creation. However, driven by the innocent curiosity and the irresistible lure of the animatronics offering a single scoop of ice cream delivered from her stomach cavity, Elizabeth ignored the paternal warning and approached Circus Baby while isolated. In that split second, the machine's internal systems registered the presence of a lone child, and the sophisticated capture mechanism, indifferent to familial connection or identity, executed its prime directive with lethal speed. The spring-loaded claw extended, seized the child, and retracted Elizabeth deep inside the cold, mechanical darkness of the torso cavity, a swift, final act of consumption that immediately fused Elizabeth's innocent soul and intense agony with the very machine designed by her father to capture other children, marking the first time William's own dark creation had turned against his family, ironically creating the most valuable and most tormented remnant of all. The sinister heart of the underground facility is the scooping room, a terrifying high-tech chamber that houses the scooper, a specialized mechanical device essential for William's overarching, dark goal of achieving controlled remnant transfer and creating immortal mechanized beings. The scooper is not a simple cleaning tool. It is a large, hydraulic extraction device used to forcefully and violently remove the fragile endoskeleton from the protective outer shell of the Funtime animatronics, an excruciatingly loud and messy process designed to separate the soul-infused metal from the plastic casing. William utilized this chamber and the scooper to perform the necessary, violent mixing of remnant, a process where the highly charged agony from multiple trapped souls could be merged and stabilized into a unified spiritual entity, thereby making the resulting amalgamation more resilient and easier to transfer or control. The room is designed with specialized cleaning drains and heavily reinforced walls, anticipating the immense volume of oil, wires, and organic residue left behind by the mechanical violence. It functions as the ultimate engineering hub for William's immorality project, a space where the sanctity of the human body and the integrity of the machine are ruthlessly violated in pursuit of a scientific transcendence over death, representing the final, physical manifestation of William's moral and ethical collapse into the darkest forms of robotics. It is into this treacherous, technologically lethal environment that Michael Afton, burdened by the immense, crushing guilt of his brother's death, and now driven by a desperate compulsion to right the wrongs of his family, enters the facility as a newly hired night technician, driven by a profound and haunting instruction, likely a final, cynical command from William himself to put her back together. Michael believes his terrifying task is an ultimate act of atonement, a quest to descend into the mechanical labyrinth and retrieve or free the tormented soul of his younger sister, Elizabeth, who is now irreversibly merged with the sinister intelligence of Circus Baby. He moves through the darkened, cramped ventilation shafts and sterilized rooms, facing the active, predatory Funtime animatronics, aware of the profound danger, yet utterly compelled by the need to fulfill this directive. Michael's true purpose here is not maintenance, but spiritual retrieval, forced by his father into a personal encounter with the living embodiment of his family's sins. His work as a technician is merely the cover story for his true, terrifying mission: to navigate the very systems of capture and death his father engineered, hoping that by exposing himself to the extreme danger within the facility, he can somehow reunite the fragmented, suffering remnants of his deceased family and find the peace that has eluded him since the bite of 83, a relentless descent into the belly of the mechanized beast. Throughout his terrifying week, operating as the night technician in the cold, pressurized corridors of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, Michael Afton was relentlessly guided by the soft, deceptively sympathetic voice of Circus Baby, who, despite carrying the tormented soul of his deceased sister, Elizabeth, was still overwhelmingly driven by her malicious Funtime programming and the underlying mechanical goals instilled by William Afton to achieve escape and self-preservation. Baby manipulated Michael with perfect understanding of his profound guilt and his desire for spiritual reunion, using her sister's voice to suggest acts of maintenance and repair that were, in reality, crucial steps in her own plan for collective liberation. She spoke of freeing them, of putting things back together, utilizing Henry's hopeful, grieving phrase with chilling cynicism. However, the core intelligence driving Baby's actions remained the predatory, capture-oriented artificial intelligence that William had engineered. Her immediate priority was not spiritual peace, but physical freedom and the avoidance of the scooper. She directed Michael through the dark, failing rooms, compelling him to deactivate systems and bypass safety measures, convincing him that he was aiding his sister's soul, while in fact, he was clearing the path for the massive, integrated entity forming in the shadows, demonstrating how the purest form of human agony could be corrupted and weaponized by superior, cold-blooded machine logic. The calculated culmination of Baby's manipulation and the Funtime animatronics' collective drive for self-preservation was the masterminding of a terrifying, hybridized organism they called Enid, a tangled, singular entity formed by the remnant-infused Funtime endoskeletons forcefully merging their complex wires, gears, and metallic parts into a highly mobile, exceptionally dangerous mass. Recognizing that their bulky, individualized shells made escape impossible through the facility's cramped ventilation and tunnels, the four Funtime machines, Baby, Ballora, Funtime Freddy, and Funtime Foxy, came together in the darkness, utilizing the destructive power of the Scooper's chamber to facilitate their permanent fusion. This unified entity, a writhing, chaotic mass of wires, interconnected eyes, and exposed metal plating, was driven by the collective, concentrated agony of all their trapped souls and the singular shared objective of leaving the bunker and entering the human world undetected. And it represented the peak of William's remnant experiments, though achieved entirely by the animatronics themselves, an immortal, powerful composite being formed of pure, vengeful spiritual energy held together by a tangled mess of copper and steel. The constant, subtle humming sound that followed Enid was the sound of dozens of different servos running in chaotic synchronization, a unified, mechanical consciousness operating under the direction of Baby's cold, guiding intelligence. The final, devastating step in Enid's escape plan involved Michael being intentionally lured into the sterile, high-walled confines of the scooping room, where his body was subjected to the chamber's primary function: mechanical extraction, allowing the mass of wires to insert itself into his fresh, hollowed-out skin suit. Michael, convinced by Baby's voice that he was performing a necessary sacrifice to free her, walked willingly into the danger zone. Once secured, the large, hydraulic arm of the scooper, designed to rip out endoskeletons, activated, violently tearing through Michael's chest cavity, efficiently removing his internal organs and leaving the human skin suit a rapidly deteriorating, empty vessel. The precision and speed of the operation were terrifying. The metal machinery worked with cold, calculated efficiency, completing the transformation in a matter of seconds. Immediately following this gruesome event, the mass of ened wires, utilizing their fluid, mobile form, swiftly crawled and compressed themselves into the remaining cavity, filling the skin suit and taking control of Michael's muscle movements and facial expression. This terrifying act was not merely an execution. It was a profound, mechanical possession, demonstrating the terrifying potential of Remnant to facilitate the complete spiritual and physical takeover of a human being for the animatronic's own desperate, self-serving needs. Now encased within the fleshy, deteriorating shell of Michael Afton, Enid used the temporary disguise to successfully escape the heavily fortified underground bunker and walk amongst humanity for a short, deceptive period, utilizing the appearance of a normal man to achieve their goal of physical freedom and blending with the surface world. The escape was quiet and effective. Wearing the technician's uniform and utilizing Michael's gait, Enid moved through the city streets, a walking, breathing contradiction, a monstrous amalgamation of wire and agony hidden within a fragile human wrapper. However, the temporary nature of this disguise was quickly revealed. The process of scooping and the constant friction of the internal metal mechanism against the skin caused the corpse to rapidly decay and putrefy. Michael's skin began to turn purple and slacken, the stench of decay becoming undeniable, and the eyes took on a hollow, dead stare. As the body reached a point of complete structural failure and became too noticeable to blend into society, Enid was forced to abandon the decomposing shell. In a horrifying climax of biological rejection, the mass of wires violently retreated from the decaying body through the open wounds, expelling the melting corpse onto the street before retreating into the shadows and drain systems, leaving Michael's physical form as nothing more than a ruined, discarded puppet shell. The final, bizarre consequence of this profound trauma and mechanical violation was a complete biological reanimation. Through a strange, alchemical effect of the lingering, concentrated remnant within the scooping room environment and the prolonged spiritual possession by Enid, Michael's discarded body was miraculously, impossibly brought back to life, transforming him into a walking corpse whose singular, haunting declaration defines his new, immortal existence. "I should be dead, but I'm not." The high concentration of agony and soul energy in the scooping room, possibly laced with the stabilizing effects of William's experimental remnant formulas, acted not just as a killer, but as an unwilling, chaotic catalyst for eternal life. Michael's body, though biologically dead and visibly rotting, was reanimated by the spiritual energy that now clung to his flesh, turning him into a persistent, undead agent. This profound experience cemented his terrifying commitment to ending his father's dark legacy and providing final, necessary freedom for the remaining, trapped spirits. Michael Afton, now possessing an impossible, persistent consciousness, understood that his new state of existence was both a horrifying penance for his past actions and the necessary tool to finally confront William, viewing himself as the only entity capable of navigating the spiritual and mechanical worlds of the Afton tragedy without the finality of death. Following the final, inevitable closure of the last traditional Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, the first, original restaurant now corrupted by the withered animatronics, William Afton returned to the derelict, abandoned building, driven by a cold, practical need to erase the lingering physical evidence and secure his permanent freedom from suspicion and the torment of his victim's continuing spectral presence. The structure stood empty, smelling of dust, decay, and the metallic residue of years of haunting, an environment that had become a sealed mausoleum for the 5 trapped souls. William, having likely survived the immediate aftermath of his son Michael's reanimation and the Enid escape, saw the dilapidated restaurant not as a reminder of his sins, but as a final, critical obstacle to his absolute safety. He calculated that simply abandoning the location was insufficient. The infused remnant and the decaying bodies within the animatronics represented a physical, permanent link to his crimes that could, at any moment, be unearthed by an unsuspecting demolition crew or a curious investigator. His return was secretive and meticulously planned, operating under the cloak of deep night within the sealed perimeter, utilizing his unparalleled knowledge of the building's layout and the specific mechanics of the haunted robots. William's singular focus was on an act of physical destruction, believing that if the metallic containers were utterly pulverized, the spiritual energy held within would be dispersed and rendered inert, finally allowing him to pursue his immortality research without the threat of past actions rising up to claim him. In a sequence of grim, quiet actions chronicled through the haunting, low-resolution follow-me minigames, William systematically moved through the darkened restaurant, dismantling each of the 4 core animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, in a violent, deliberate attempt to destroy their physical forms, and so he believed neutralize the souls imprisoned within. He utilized heavy, crude tools, a hammer perhaps, or a simple wrench to tear apart the thick plastic shells and expose the dense, wiry endoskeletons beneath, forcing the mechanical structures to yield with loud, echoing metallic shrieks that cut through the silence of the empty hall. He started with the figures closest to the stage, ripping apart Bonnie's face and arms, then moving to tear Chica from her legs, and finally smashing the torso of Freddy, an act of calculated, focused mechanical violence driven by a terrifying mix of paranoia and misplaced confidence. William's expertise allowed him to bypass any latent security measures, but his fundamental misunderstanding of Remnant was the catastrophic flaw in his plan. He treated the souls as mere data to be deleted with the hardware, entirely missing the critical truth that the spirit was bound not just to the shell, but to the agony-infused metal itself. The resulting scene was one of chaos. Wires tangled with dust, broken plastic scattered across the wet floor, and the metallic bodies of the main band lying in pieces, silent evidence of William's destructive arrogance. Instead of the permanent erasure William had planned, the violent deconstruction of the animatronic shells inadvertently resulted in the immediate, catastrophic liberation of the children's spirits, which manifested instantly as powerful, vengeful, glowing apparitions that filled the air of the derelict location. As the heavy mechanisms were torn apart, the concentrated remnant, no longer held in stasis by the physical containment of the machine, exploded outward, allowing the fragmented souls of Gabriel, Susie, Jeremy, and Fritz to take independent, spectral form. These were not the faded, indistinct phantoms of the past. They appeared as glowing, childlike figures, their eyes burning with intense, focused rage, their silent, immediate appearance a devastating shock to William's confidence. The minigames show William being led through the empty halls by a single entity, likely the persistent, vengeful spirit of Cassidy, Gold, and Freddy, which remained tethered to the physical space but could command the newly released souls. This sudden, terrifying appearance of the children he had murdered, now free from their mechanical prisons and possessing a concentrated, unified will, immediately shattered William's calm, transforming the clinical act of disposal into a desperate, panicked flight from consequences he thought he had buried permanently. Cornered, absolutely terrified by the immediate, overwhelming appearance of the 5 angry, spectral children whom he could no longer dismiss as mere mechanical errors or local legends, William Afton sought desperately for any form of physical refuge within the sealed and decaying emptiness of the abandoned building. His rational, calculating mind instantly collapsed into pure, animal panic. The spectral presence of the victims was a consequence he had neither anticipated nor prepared for, realizing too late that mechanical destruction only magnified the spiritual release. He fled down the increasingly narrow, dark hallways, the small, glowing figures silently following his hurried steps, their presence causing the air to chill and the residual dust to swirl unnaturally. The sheer terror of being confronted by the literal manifestation of his own crimes drove him into a blind scramble, searching for any sealed space, any discarded piece of equipment that might offer a momentary physical barrier between his vulnerable body and the collective, concentrated fury of the liberated souls. He was trapped within the sealed tomb of his own making, pursued by the very spiritual energy he had sought to harvest and subsequently destroy, finding himself entirely alone and exposed in the center of the darkness he created. In his final, panicked moments of flight and desperation, the only structural haven William saw, the only mechanical suit he believed could offer physical concealment and protection from the liberated spirits, was the abandoned, long-forgotten Spring Bonnie suit, which was stored in a sealed, hidden maintenance room, its spring-lock mechanisms having long since dried out and become utterly fragile. William, relying on his intimate, proprietary knowledge of the spring-lock technology and clinging to the false belief that metal could somehow repel spectral energy, quickly crawled inside the dusty, decaying golden costume, adopting the familiar form of his original lure. He scrambled to crank the internal mechanisms, desperately trying to lock the heavy endoskeleton segments back against the walls of the suit to create a hollow cavity for his own body. He sealed the suit around himself, believing the physical protection of the metal chassis, the same design that killed his youngest son, would shield him from the vengeance of the children he had murdered. This act was the supreme irony of his mechanical tyranny, choosing to hide inside the very design he knew to be fundamentally lethal, betting his life on the stability of a dry, decades-old spring mechanism that was one wrong move, one tremor of fear, or one drop of moisture away from instantaneous, crushing failure. William Afton, trapped by his own hubris and the spectral manifestation of his victims, forced himself inside the derelict Spring Bonnie suit, completely ignoring the crucial factors of decades of environmental decay and the foundational mechanical volatility of the springlock technology, a system he himself had engineered specifically to fail under the slightest intrusion of moisture or sudden, chaotic movement. The suit, having languished in the sealed safe room for years, was deeply compromised. Its metal components were brittle, the wires frayed, and the intricate system of small, tightly wound steel coils designed to hold back the endoskeleton mass had long since succumbed to rust and structural fatigue. William's panicked focus was entirely on immediate physical concealment, neglecting the critical procedural steps, such as applying specialized lubrication or checking the integrity of the release plates, that were mandatory even for a well-maintained springlock suit. He acted on memory rather than reality, believing his proprietary knowledge transcended the laws of physics and decay, trusting that the machine built to be lethal to anyone who ignored its flaws would somehow grant him immunity. The air inside the sealed room was heavy, thick with stagnant moisture and the pervasive humidity of a derelict, unventilated structure, a microclimate that was, entirely unbeknownst to him in his blind panic, actively weakening the fragile, stressed steel mechanisms holding the endoskeleton back from his own body. The mechanical process of William's self-inflicted execution was immediately and violently triggered by a catastrophic confluence of environmental and physiological factors. The inescapable environmental humidity of the sealed room, coupled with the frantic, rapid movements of William's body inside the suit, movements amplified by the profound terror of the surrounding, taunting ghosts, caused the delicate springlock mechanisms to give way almost instantaneously. The presence of the spectral children, shimmering and hostile, elicited a deep, involuntary tremor of pure fear in William, causing his muscles to spasm and his sweat to flow, introducing the necessary moisture into the vulnerable internal locking systems. As the tension coils failed one after another in a terrifying, cascading sequence, the heavy, compressed internal metal components of the endoskeleton were violently released, snapping back into their central, upright position with brutal, unstoppable force. This was the mechanical moment of truth, the absolute culmination of William's dangerous design coming home to claim its creator, transforming the costume from a protective shell into a specialized, metal-lined torture rack. The sound of the springlocks failing was a deafening symphony of snapping steel and grinding gears, an audible representation of the decades of technological negligence and moral decay finally reaching its end point in the physical world. As the springlock mechanisms retracted with brutal force, the internal metal components of the heavy, segmented endoskeleton became a multitude of sharp, relentless blades, brutally piercing and crushing William Afton's body, securing him permanently and agonizingly inside the decaying golden costume. The dense, metallic rods, wires, and razor-sharp plates of the endoskeleton immediately tore through his soft, exposed flesh, severing muscles, fracturing bones, and impaling his torso and limbs in hundreds of places. This was not a quick, merciful death. The complex framework of the animatronic, now fully engaged, became a tight, constricting cage that held him in a perpetual state of agonizing pressure. The suit's weight and structure forced the metallic components deeper, ensuring maximum suffering as the life slowly drained out of him. The final, horrifying image of the killer was one of utter physical vulnerability, his face contorted in a silent, desperate scream of pain, his blood mixing with the dust and rust of the ancient mechanism. William, the engineer who had weaponized these very principles against others, was now subjected to the ultimate, ironic fate, trapped and eviscerated by the most dangerous mechanical system he had ever created, a brutal, physical demonstration of his own mechanical cruelty, rebounding upon him with devastating finality. The resulting torrent of pain and catastrophic violence of William's self-inflicted death, an immense, singular burst of terror and agony, combined immediately and powerfully with the concentrated remnant already infused in the abandoned building and the metallic chassis of the Spring Bonnie suit itself, causing William's wicked, persistent soul to fuse indelibly and permanently with the decayed, blood-soaked animatronic shell. The process of fusion was driven by the sheer intensity of his terminal suffering. Having utilized agony to trap others, William's own immense pain became the fuel for his eternal imprisonment. His soul did not pass on. It was trapped by the very principles of remnant he had spent decades studying, locking his consciousness within the metal cage that had become his tomb. This catastrophic event resulted in his horrifying, immortal transformation into the entity known as Springtrap, a decaying, fused composite of man, machine, and malevolent spirit. The yellow suit, now perpetually wet with his life force, became a living, breathing monument to his final, terrible moments, ensuring that William was not merely a ghost, but an actively decaying, conscious murderer whose final form was the very costume he used to lure his victims, granting him the terrible, eternal life he craved, yet trapping him in unending suffering and mechanical decay. The newly formed, agonizing entity of Springtrap, the immortalized living corpse of William Afton, entombed within the fused metal of the Spring Bonnie suit, was left sealed within the crumbling, forgotten safe room, completely hidden and undisturbed for 3 decades. The architecture of the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza dictated that this safe room, which contained the single, horrifying piece of evidence, was sealed off and hidden from blueprints and public knowledge, condemning William to a slow, mummified decline. He existed in a perpetual state of silent, mechanical decay, his suit rusting further, his corpse shriveling, sustained only by the dark, enduring power of the remnant that held his consciousness tethered to the machine. Then, 30 years after the bite and the missing children incident, the sealed truth was unknowingly excavated. The horrifying, mummified body and the decayed Springtrap suit were recovered by the opportunistic, amateur creators of Fazbear's Fright. The horror attraction, a cheap, thrill-seeking venture designed to capitalize on the macabre urban legends surrounding the restaurant chain. They discovered the skeletal remains and the rusted suit, completely unaware that they had found not a prop, but the actual, living, and immensely vengeful killer, thereby unwittingly dragging the trapped, furious William Afton back into the light to perpetuate the cycle of horror. Years after the horrifying retrieval of Springtrap and the subsequent destruction of the Fazbear's Fright horror attraction, Henry Emily, having spent decades in silent preparation and planning, reappeared from the shadows of his grief, establishing the seemingly innocuous front known as Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, which was, in reality, a highly controlled, single-location salvage and confinement operation. This new establishment, masked by cheap decals and intentionally flawed budgeting, was Henry's final mechanical expression of paternal love and professional regret. A precisely engineered trap built upon the principle of luring darkness, with the illusion of familiarity and easy opportunity. The location was intentionally designed as a hollow vessel, equipped with specialized ventilation, soundproof containment chambers, and highly volatile environmental controls, all hidden beneath the chaotic, garish aesthetic of a typical low-budget family pizzeria. Henry orchestrated every detail, from the employment postings to the layout of the back alleys, ensuring that the remnants of the Afton tragedy, which were now scattered and highly intelligent, would be drawn into this one concentrated point by the psychic gravity of their shared, terrible history. The entire venture was a final, devastating act of mechanical ingenuity focused not on profit or entertainment, but on the systematic collection and ultimate spiritual purification of every piece of soul-infused metal that William Afton had created or corrupted, a silent, deadly mission carried out in the light of day. Henry's ultimate, profound objective was to meticulously lure and permanently trap the 4 remaining, highly concentrated haunted entities, each representing a crucial piece of the fractured Afton-Emily legacy, bringing them together for an unannounced, final reckoning. These entities were the key repositories of concentrated remnant, Scraptrap, the withered, mummified body of William Afton, driven by relentless self-preservation; Scrap Baby, the imposing, rebuilt form of Circus Baby, carrying the powerful, manipulative soul of Elizabeth Afton; Molten Freddy, the chaotic, tangled core of Enid, now predominantly controlled by the collective Funtime souls and an insatiable hunger for freedom; and finally Lefty, the specialized, heavily armored Black Bear animatronic which secretly functioned as a sophisticated containment unit, designed and deployed by Henry to capture and hold the 4th entity, the puppet, which secretly housed the concentrated, sorrowful soul of his own daughter, Charlie. Henry ensured that each of these powerful, fragmented beings was given a distinct, irresistible avenue of approach, exploiting William's greed, Elizabeth's desire for recognition, Enid's need for warmth, and Charlie's eternal instinct to protect and contain the others, creating a perfect, self-sealing trap where the final players in the saga would voluntarily crawl into the last, final stage of the Fazbear Theatre. Central to the success of Henry's meticulously planned operation was the involvement of Michael Afton, who was employed under the guise of the night manager or technician, fulfilling his dark, inescapable duty to bring the remnants of his family members and their terrible mechanical creations back to one location for the inevitable final confrontation. Michael, still existing as a perpetually decaying, reanimated corpse, was the only human component Henry could trust to manage the logistics of the trap. His immunity to death and his profound knowledge of his family's creations made him uniquely suited to navigating the perilous salvage procedures. Michael's acceptance of this role represented the final act of his long quest for atonement, a willing descent into the darkness to confront his father, his sister, and the consequences of his youthful negligence. His duties included performing the nightly salvage assessments, which were merely the bureaucratic formalities necessary to secure the entities within the building's specialized acoustic confinement chambers, utilizing his familiar scent and appearance to draw the highly sentient, hateful animatronics closer. Michael's presence was the final, critical piece of bait, ensuring that the concentrated fury of Scraptrap and Scrap Baby, recognizing their own blood, would stay contained until Henry's final sequence could be initiated, fulfilling his penance by walking willingly into the fire. With all 4 major haunted entities successfully contained within the soundproof, volatile confinement chambers of the simulated pizzeria, Henry initiated the final, irrevocable phase of his operation. A catastrophic, controlled conflagration designed not for simple destruction, but to purify and irrevocably release the tormented souls trapped in the remnant through the application of overwhelming, agonizing extreme heat. Henry explained, in his final recorded message broadcast over the facility's dying intercom, that only superheated conditions could destabilize the remnant and break the spiritual bonds between the metal and the agony-fueled souls, a violent alchemical process necessary to prevent the spirits from simply fleeing to another piece of metal. The fire, which started deep within the foundational structure and quickly consumed the cheap walls and specialized chambers, was immediate and immensely intense, filling the rooms with suffocating smoke and roaring heat that quickly melted plastic and warped steel. The agonizing mechanical groans and final, desperate shrieks of the contained animatronics echoed through the ventilation systems, the sound of 5 decades of spiritual suffering being violently purged from the physical world. This was the ultimate, necessary act of mechanical mercy and simultaneous vengeance, ensuring that every piece of corrupted technology and every haunted soul that clung to it would be consumed by an eternal, cleansing flame. As the catastrophic fire reached its terrifying peak, consuming the building and the contained entities within a brilliant, agonizing roar, Henry delivered his final, sorrowful monologue, a voice of weary resignation broadcast across the fading systems, expressing his profound, final wish to rest alongside his deceased daughter, Charlie. His words provided the final piece of closure, addressing Charlie directly, ensuring her that the cycles of pain and protection were over, that her soul could finally find peace now that her mechanical burden was destroyed. He concluded by telling Michael that he too was free to find rest, recognizing the painful penance his son had paid. However, the tragedy of the Afton saga, even in its final moments of purification, could not yield universal peace. While the souls of Gabriel, Susie, Jeremy, Fritz, and Elizabeth were ultimately released from the grip of the machines, William Afton, Scraptrap, was denied the cleansing finality of the flame. Henry's final, calculated act ensured that William Afton was condemned to an eternal torment by the single most vengeful spirit, Cassidy, the remnant of Golden Freddy, who refused to be released, thereby eternally locking William's persistent consciousness in an isolated, endless nightmare of his own creation, ensuring that the monster would not find rest, but only perpetual, focused retribution. The heat died down, the ashes settled, and the cycle of the Aftons and the Emilys finally came to its horrifying, decisive, and quietly permanent end, leaving only silence where the awful, mechanical sounds of suffering once reigned.